Hello and welcome back to ÀṣọEl-emet Academy. In lesson 1, we talked about preparing for your sewing journey and the essential tools every beginner should have. Today, we are going to answer one of the questions almost every beginner asks. Which sewing machine should I use? If you have ever searched online for sewing machines, you've probably seen different sizes, different brands, and different prices. Some are small enough to place on a table, others are, you know, large machines mounted on heavy sewing tables. And when you look at them for the first time, it might look completely different. But don't worry, by the end of this lesson, you'll understand the difference between industrial and domestic sewing machines, and you'll know which one is most suitable for your goals. So now we move on to the next question, the proper question, which is, what is a sewing machine? A sewing machine is a machine designed to join two or more pieces of fabric together using thread. Before sewing machines were invented, people sewed or made clothes using a needle and thread. And funny enough that despite how popular machines are today, hand sewing is still useful. It's still being done, but it's not as common, right, as it used to be back then. Because sewing machine allow us to work faster, produce stronger stitches, and create garments more efficiently. So whether you are making school uniforms, dresses, shirts, skirts, or cottons, the sewing machine helps you produce neat and consistent results. So now we already know what sewing is. Let's move on to machines, type of machines. We have domestic machine, industrial machine. We'll be starting with the domestic sewing machine. The domestic sewing machine, like the name implied, is basically designed or was basically designed for home use. Here in Nigeria, we know a domestic machine to be a manual machine. Our normal blackheads, that's what we know the machine to be. They are majorly, smaller and lighter compared to the industrial machine. And then for some of the white heads, those of us who are quite conversant with machines would have seen some white heads that have decorative stitches, buttonhole function, zigzag stitches. They are also domestic machines, right? But the one that is most common here in Nigeria is the blackhead, the butterfly blackhead manual machine, the singer blackhead manual machine. That is the most common domestic machines we have in Nigeria, and I always recommend these domestic machines for beginners. If you are a beginner, outright beginner, I always recommend that you start out your sewing with domestic machines, with the manual machine. They are easy to use. They help you build confidence as you keep on using them. Then as you've grown, then you can now migrate to the industrial machine. Domestic machines are excellent for beginners because they make sewing easy, especially when you start out with small home projects. They make it easy, and they also make sewing easy, right? We'll know more about this as we compare, as we check out what the industrial machine is. Now we know what a domestic machine is. What is an industrial machine? This is an industrial machine, and industrial machines are designed for their names, the industry, right? Because they are larger, they are heavier, and much faster than domestic machines. Was why I recommended domestic machines if you are just starting out, because the moment you put your feet on the foot pedal or the industrial machine, because you are not able to control the motor, it moves very fast. But if you've had consistent practice on your manual machine, you'd be able to know how to maneuver your feet and pedaling of the industrial machine, right? You see today in Nigeria now that the industrial machine has taken over most tailoring shops. In fact, even most fashion designers shops now use industrial machine, and the reason is because aside the fact that it's faster, it doesn't select fabrics. What do I mean by that? Your domestic machine could sew some heavy fabric, but it's limited. But industrial machine will work on any type of garment as long as the needle is correct, and it will give you a beautiful stitch, right? And unlike the black head or the white manual head, industrial machine does not have, decorative stitch options and all of that, but it gives you speed, strength, and consistency. That's why I say that I always recommend the manual machine for beginners, and then as you have grown, you can now migrate to the industrial machine, because by then you know how to control the speed of the industrial machine. So industrial machines are designed for professional work. They are designed for, heavy lifting. That's just what it is. They are designed for heavy lifting. The domestic machine is small, the industrial machine is large. The domestic machine is portable, the industrial machine is fixed on a table. It comes with its own table when they are coupling it together. The industrial machine is slower because you pedal with your feet, right? Unlike the industrial machine that is faster, it already has a motor. You just put your leg on it, and then if you don't know how to control it, you just, the only thing you'll be hearing is von otilo. Do you get? So I always recommend domestic machines for beginners. It's little, you can use it to maneuver your stitch, maneuver your curves, maneuver your own projects, whatever you want to get. The domestic machine for beginner is always good, right? So now when you want to compare, or we want to choose as a beginner or as a beginner, which one should you buy? I would answer, right? I have recommended the manual machine as the best for a beginner. But then this is what I would say: buy the best machine that fits your budget and your sewing goals, right? So if your goal is to learn sewing at home, make clothes for yourself and your family, or sew occasionally, or you just want to make sewing an hobby, right? The manual machine is a go-to for you. I bet you would not regret getting it. Forget all this trend we are seeing online about motor drives, the industrial machine. The manual machine is actually a very good machine if you just want it for you and maybe your nuclear family, projects, right? But if you know that you want to become a professional tailor, you want to sew for clients, right? You want to build a sewing business. You want to have like a sewing school. You want to build a sewing business. You want to have clients. You want to do RTW. You want to do custom. You want to take it from a smaller scale to a bigger scale. It's something you want to make your full-time job. Then the industrial machine is good. But I'll still say, with my years of experience in sewing, if you are just starting out in this sewing or tailoring thing, your best bet, your go-to now, is the manual machine. In fact, you can decide to indulge yourself and get the one that comes with decorative stitches, zigzag stitches, but your own functions. But the manual machine is your best go-to if you are a beginner. That being said, I need you to remember that the machine itself is not what makes you a good tailor or a good sewist. No. Being a good tailor comes from learning, unlearning, practicing, and then understanding the fundamentals of being a tailor and even of the tools you'll be using. So we've talked about the manual and industrial machine. I just want to quickly add that you should never believe that you cannot start learning because you don't own expensive equipment. Don't let TikTok deceive you. Don't let those trending videos about tailors unveiling, don't let it deceive you, right? Never believe that you cannot start learning because you don't own expensive equipment. No, I can tell you that even most successful designers began with a domestic sewing machine. Ask Prudential, right? Ask Prudential, right? She'll tell you she started with a manual sewing machine. Majority of successful designers, even the likes of my favorite, my Atafo, started with a domestic sewing machine. So never believe that you cannot start learning because you don't own expensive equipment. Start with what you have. Develop your skills. Then as your experience grows and your sewing needs increase, you can upgrade your equipment when the time is right. I started out with a manual machine. Right, I started out with a manual machine. I started learning. In fact, it was a second-hand manual machine I started out with, and then I gathered my money, and got myself an industrial. I think I got this industrial for 2020, 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And then I gave out the black head, right? So start with what you have. Develop your skills. I gave out the black head because there was no space. I still sew for home for my clients and all of that. So start with what you have. Develop your skills. Then as your experience grows, your sewing needs increases, you can upgrade your equipment when the time is right. Remember that the quality of your work depends far more on your knowledge and practice than on the price of your machine. So that being said, every practical we are going to be doing in this academy will be done using my industrial machine, my email 8500 machine, because that's the machine I use most often. But don't worry if you are learning with a manual machine. Like I said, the sewing principles you learn apply to both, either you using a manual or industrial machine, right? And then whenever or wherever an important difference is, I would point out clearly, because my goal actually is that every beginner learns with confidence regardless of the machine you own, right? So that being said, I need you to know that industrial machines are only for professionals is a myth, but I recommend manual machine, right, for beginners. Good. Now I also need to let you know that domestic machines cannot make professional clothes is also a myth, right? You can produce beautiful clothes or styles on a domestic machine because the machine is just a tool, right? It is your skill, your technique, and you're practicing consistently that all aids you producing a beautiful cloth. Now, the third myth here is you need the most expensive machine before you can start learning. Absolutely not. I said it and I'm saying it again. I recommend that you start learning sewing with the manual machine, right? So that being said, I also need to let you know that learning begins with commitment, not with an expensive equipment. So use the best machine you have access to and focus on mastering the basics. Use what you have and focus on mastering the basics. And then as you continue, as you grow, you can begin to upgrade your Before we come to the end of our class today, let's quickly review everything we've learned together. We've learned the different types of machine, the manual and industrial machine. We've learned that the industrial machine is good and for home use because that's what it was designed for. We've learned that an industrial machine is good for heavy work or heavy duty work because of the speed, the strength, and the consistency, right? We've also learned that neither machines automatically make someone a better sewist, but your skills, your patience, and practice are what make the difference, right? So we've learned that we want to start with what we have, learn consistently, practice often, improve little by little, because that is how confident tailors or sewists are made. Because as a tailor, even as a beginner, you can produce better work on a domestic machine if you have good sewing knowledge than someone with an expensive industrial machine who doesn't understand the basics. So that being said, your homework for today is to observe your sewing machine if you have it. Don't switch it on if it is an industrial. If it is not an industrial, just look at it. Notice the size, notice how it was built. Simply look at it, observe it, then ask yourself, which is my machine? An industrial or a domestic? What brand is it? I told you my own that I'm using. My industrial machine is email 8500. That's one I'm using, straight sewing machine. Then you ask yourself, can I identify where the thread will probably pass? Can I identify where the needle is located? If you cannot or you don't have all the answers yet, don't worry. The reason for today is just to become familiar with your machine. In our next lesson, we are going to be answering all of those questions. And if you don't own a sewing machine here, that's perfectly fine. You can visit a tailoring shop nearby or a sewing center, or if you have a friend who owns one, and just observe the machine closely, right? Because the more familiar it becomes, the more confident you feel when you begin sewing. Now, I want you to know that sewing is a journey. There are days when everything will look like it's easy. There are days when nothing will go as planned. But don't give up. Every fashion designer you see now, that is good. One struggled with threading a machine, sewing a straight line, understanding different sewing tools. So what made the difference wasn't talent alone, it was the willingness to keep learning and practicing. So give yourself permission to go, indulge yourself. Don't compare your beginning with someone else's years of experience. Every improvement, no matter how small, celebrate yourself. Celebrate yourself. Here at ÀṣọEl-emet Academy, we'll take this journey one lesson at a time, building a strong foundation that will help you soar with confidence. Right? So you should be the one that should be determined not to give up. You should be the one that should be determined not to give. That being said, I want you not to miss the next lesson. That's lesson 3 of module 1, because we'll be having a detailed tour of an industrial machine. Remember, I said that's what we're going to be using. But then I've also said that the sewing principles applies to both industrial and manual machine. So we'll be taking a detailed tour of an industrial machine. We'll be looking at the names and the function of its individual parts. And so at the end of that lesson 3, you'll be able to identify the major components of an industrial machine and understand how they produce neat and professional stitches. So make sure you don't miss it. Thank you for joining me for lesson 2. If you found this lesson helpful, please subscribe to ÀṣọEl-emet Academy, like this video, and share with someone else who wants to learn sewing. If you have any questions about today's lessons, leave them in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer them, I promise you. And your question might even be featured in a future lesson. Until next time, please keep learning, keep practicing, and remember, every beautiful garment begins with a strong foundation. Thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you in lesson 3. Bye.